welcome to No Fit State, a program that asks the question, if the government are clearly not working in our best interest, who are they working for? As always, leading you down this slippery precipice is James, that's me, and Mike, who I'll pass you over to now.
On today's show, we're pleased to welcome American activist and talk radio host Adam Kokesh from AdamVersusTheMan.com. Adam was a corporal in the United States Marine Corps Reserve, and he is a veteran of the Iraq War. By challenging authority, Adam argues that the reality of government is not based on protecting the freedoms of the people, but exploiting them to perpetuate its own power and serve its sponsors. The message of freedom that Adam's show is based on is about conquering that desire to rule over others and that willingness to accept rule by force. Hi Adam, I'm Mike. Just to kick us off, Adam, I wonder if you can tell us about your experience as a member of the US military, serving in Iraq in 2004, and perhaps speak to how this led to you pursuing the path that you've taken, really.
Sure. Well, my experience in the military is probably the largest motivator of my conversion, my awakening, if you will. But it really is a bit of a longer process than that. And the story has to start before I enlisted in the Marines, because when I was in high school, even I think middle school, as a kid, I was a libertarian, although I didn't even know what it meant. It was more like, well, I'm going to be a libertarian because I'm not going to be a Republican or a Democrat. Hell no. So it was that I had to be a libertarian to not be, part of the status quo. For me, kind of being a rebellious punk kid led me to want to be a libertarian, which is what led me to join the Marines as opposed to one of the other branches, is that we do kind of pride ourselves in a bit of a rebellious nature and being hardcore like that. But for me, joining the Marines was wanting to serve my country, wanting to defend this country. But I should also point out that in a really sick kind of way, I actually used to say more or less these exact words, that if the government decides that someone deserves to die, I want to be the person behind the trigger. And when you understand what government is, you understand what a sick beta male lackey kind of statement that is, and it really is disturbing in hindsight. I think that was my mentality, and that's the mentality of a lot of people in the military today. But I joined the reserves because my parents expected me to go to college, and I was in the reserves when I volunteered to go to Fallujah in 2004. I served with the civil affairs team. I'm still stuck in that statist language. Did I just say served? Did I just get in the Marines as serving? Because if I'm going to use that word, like as you do, who's the government working for? Well, it's certainly not the American people. So if I was serving in the military, it was serving the whims of politicians at the behest of the military-industrial complex. But I have to say, and this is what I mean by having to start the story earlier, is that it really is kind of a slow story, and kind of an embarrassingly slow one, when you see how fast people are coming out of the matrix these days, thanks to the internet. We used to say, what's the difference between a minarchist and an anarchist, and joke that it was about 6 months. Well, now we have to say, well, maybe more like 2 weeks of watching the right YouTube videos and reading Wikipedia articles, and you're there. At least a lot of people are. And for me, it was a process that really took more like a dozen years. So when I got back from Iraq, I was still in the bubble. I was still isolated from the true nature of the world and of government. And I volunteered to go back to Iraq because I didn't get a Purple Heart the first time. So trying to go back to Iraq, having gotten in trouble for bringing a pistol back the first time, being a case of government waste myself as a sergeant who spoke Arabic with civil affairs experience, really motivated me because I got busted down the day after they gave me a medal, like right before getting out of the military. And I think I'm very grateful for that experience, because I was just disgruntled enough to really start questioning things. And I think it's important to point out that a lot of people who come to this message, the early adopters, if you will, aren't the captains of the football team or the cheerleading squad or the student body presidents. They're the outcasts, the misfits, the victims of the system, rather than the ones that are protected by it. And in that sense, I think those of us who have had such experiences are much more inclined to start questioning the nature of government. And that was a very, very pivotal experience for me, getting busted down and then being given a medal one day and literally busted down the next day, and then soon after that getting out of the Marines, really prepared me to have my mind open in challenging the status quo. And for me, it was, even that wasn't enough for me to say that was the transformation. Even what I realized about the first battle of Fallujah that I was a part of, watching the second battle play on the front page of the New York Times when I was in college, and realizing that men were dying. Hey, I'm really sorry about that. Our regular internet here is on the fritz thanks to Verizon, so I'm on and off a hotspot.
Oh, no problem, mate.
Yeah, so what I was talking about was the video in question was your Ground Zero military outreach, which was conveniently interrupted by the NYPD. And what I was getting at was to what extent the officers in question are consumed with military objectives and the camaraderie of it all, and really, how politically aware you can be as a soldier.
Well, it's tough. We have a lot of members of the Adam versus the Man audience who are active duty military, and it's really encouraging to know that. And we have even one who's an instructor at an MOS school at Cherry Point in North Carolina, the Marine Corps base. And he actually uses our videos as part of his discussion time with his troops. And that's really exciting. But
that's awesome.
It's difficult. It's like when you're in the middle of committing a crime and you realize that it's a crime, and what do you do in that situation, especially when there are dire consequences to immediate withdrawal of your actions and your contribution to the military. But you were asking about that video of our outreach at Ground Zero on 9/11. And I was talking to some of the troops that were guarding one of the metro stations, and there were a couple of guys that were just walking around, and there were these young guys that were not on duty. And while I was talking to them, one of the guys that was on duty pulled them away from me in the middle of our friendly conversation, which was very rude. He stepped in because he outranked them and said, "Come with us," and he was. I tried to follow them and was blocked by a police officer who just stood and put his back to me and stood in front of me. So I was like forcibly separated from the person that I was having a conversation with, because he didn't know that he had the freedom to stay there and talk to me. And the police and the soldier that was on duty worked together to keep him away from me. So I don't know how to answer that question though about the cops, because it's so varied. And when you bring the interaction between the other half of the Praetorian class into the picture, it is almost better to see it as a single organism of enforcement of state policy, because you have so many personnel that go from one to the other. There's cross training, there's militarization of the police, and in that sense they're both the ones that do the bidding of the politicians. Like I was saying that when I joined the Marines, because I said if the government decided that someone should die, I should be the one pulling the trigger. And that's the mentality that we're up against, the people that will follow orders without asking questions. Because when you'll do that, people who can make you believe absurdities will make you can get you to commit atrocities. And that's what we have in our foreign policy and in the police state today.
Adam, you had, I think it was in March, you had the Ron Paul as the choice of the troops. I remember following that quite intently leading up to the march, and we started to see basically threats from the military at the troops that, that they weren't allowed to, show support for a candidate. And they really didn't like that the troops were going to be marching in support of Ron Paul. Did you actually hear of anything that actually, any repercussions that they actually fought, or was it more or less just posturing to try and put them off going in the first place?
I think it was mostly posturing, but what we did hear was not, I went to the march and this happened, but it was more like, well, I came out in the military as a libertarian, and as a result, I'm doing extra duty every weekend, right. That kind of thing. And that's the thing, is like you'll never know, and you don't realize until you join the military, at least the people that do join and don't realize this before they join, and will soon realize it when they do, is that you really are at the whims of a hierarchical structure where anybody who happens to be higher than you in the pyramid gets to tell you what to do, no matter what, based on their subjective whims. And really, the enlistment document, notice the term enlistment document, it's not a contract. And it says in fine print at the bottom, we may change the terms of this agreement at any time without any notice to you whatsoever. And you are signing your life away. You are saying, I am willing to become government property under these terms. So I think that's more of what you see than the overt stuff, because especially what they did around the Ron Paul is the choice of the troops march. We got the email of warning that I read, and I think that video got 130,000 views or something, before the march. That it backfired. It's the Streisand effect. So I think they're getting smarter, and I think they're realizing. And I think a lot of the times when you see it backfiring, it's somewhat deliberate. And I can't help but think, as I did around then, maybe it was a commander who was looking at this thing and going, they're going to march for Ron Paul. Well, I'm an officer, so I can't really, and I'm in a politicized position, and I can't really do anything about it. But none of my superiors are going to complain if I write an overly harsh warning letter that's going to cause a ruckus and bring more attention to this, and that's how I'll help the event. And I think a lot of times, I'll bet there are a lot of times where you're just like, that's got to be the case. There's no way they're that dumb. There's no way they're realizing the consequences of putting out a letter like that.
And the whole engine is so incredibly complex and well war game that it does, you do realize that sometimes months later that a lot of the things that you think are, you're getting a jump on them or they're heavy-handed, it's quite well thought up. So another thing was, just before we move on to the next subject, I was at the pub yesterday, and there was somebody going off to Afghanistan. He works in intelligence, and he, from what I could sort of gather from him without him actually telling me too much, they're pretty much gearing up for a war. You were saying that you don't think that they'll be able to get away with another strike, like a conflict with Iran, or do you think?
Oh no, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it's going to be harder because of the connectivity that we have with the internet.
Mm-hmm. All right. So
yeah. Well, we've been seeing the demonization of Iran and Ahmadinejad for a long time, but funnily enough, a lot of sort of YouTube clips are sort of breaking through, which kind of dispel the rhetoric really of particularly of the US government. Just on the subject of Ron Paul, then, now that the GOP seem to have slammed the door, obviously on Paul's efforts, has it made you rethink in regards to using the political process for change? And where do you think the campaign went wrong?
Oh, well, and where the campaign went wrong, I think it's really simple that Ron made the decision early on that he wasn't trying to win converts. He was trying to win votes and build his email list and raise money. And whether he made that decision like that as simply as I stated is, a question only that he can answer. But in terms of the organization of his campaign and what he did and what the people around him were doing, that's definitely what it looked like. And I know a lot of the people that worked for him personally, like Jesse Benton and John Tate. Actually, I used to be friends with both of them, and Debbie Hopper. None of them are libertarians the way that Ron Paul is. None of them are voluntarists. They're you could say, principled conservatives, minarchists, small government types, even, and with Jesse Benton, who we know is now working for Mitch McConnell, it's hard to say if he has any principle whatsoever. But and I understand the temptation of this because I ran for Congress and I had to put together a campaign team. And when you're in that position, you realize what you're doing. You can't just hire the regular political operatives. You have to have people that you can trust. And people harp on Ron Paul for the nepotism, and I don't blame him for that. Of all the things that people hold against Ron Paul, I certainly understand wanting to have people around you that you can absolutely trust in your organization. And if it has to be family, it has to be family. And I don't have any problem with that. The problem is when you don't analyze people in your family with the same scrutiny as those outside, and you end up with people like Jesse Benton on your campaign. But I also understand the idea of wanting, like, for example, for a while in my campaign, my manager was a Green Party type, and she was she was smart enough as a Green Party type to say, well, I would much rather have a Libertarian in office than a mainstream Democrat. Mm-hmm. And she was very supportive of me. I knew her her name is Tina Richards. We worked together as activists in the anti-war movement. She'd managed the campaign before. And the thinking is, well, if I can get her, then maybe she can help me convince all the other Green Party types to come along. And that was a good strategy for my campaign. The problem is that we lost the primary because we got stabbed in the back by the establishment there, the GOP, and I made the gross tactical error of trusting the establishment. But in the case of Ron Paul, what he didn't realize is that the power of his campaign in 2008 was not from winning votes. It was from winning converts. And the kinds of people that he surrounded himself with, whose salaries that we paid as donors to the campaign, John Tate, Jesse Benton, Debbie Hopper, people like that, is that they were not the kinds of people that would have donated to the campaign if they weren't working for it, because they weren't converts. They weren't people who really embraced the message. And so they were going out to win votes and raise money and get their email list grown. And they didn't give a damn about those of us who were donating to the campaign, who wanted to see it run in a way that would win converts, that would spread the message. And of course, Ron's work speaks for itself. His speeches speak for themselves. And there are great ways to reach out and convert people. And I think that the greatest opportunity of the Ron Paul campaign, when Ron Paul was a candidate, was in using him as a way to reach out to people, because it's a lot easier for some people when you knock on their door and you go, hey, check out this brand new philosophy I just got turned on to, and you should totally embrace it too and live your life differently, right? You're going to get the door slammed in your face. But if you say, hey, do you care who your next president is? Of course I do. And for the people that care about it, it's a good way to pull them out of the system. And I think it serves a unique purpose for the libertarian movement to have politicians, to have candidates that you can use to reach those kinds of sheeple through that kind of outreach. But that's, the limitation of it. And you asked in the first part of your question how that changed my view of the political process. And in this sense, there are, I think people have some sort of misconceptions about my position, either greatly overvaluing or undervaluing my emphasis on the political process as it relates to the liberty movement. And some people go, well, Adam, you ran for Congress and you supported Ron Paul, so obviously you're one of those people that think politics is the only solution for bringing about liberty. And others will say, well, Adam, you just changed your logo to black and yellow, so obviously you're anti-political, right? And I see specific narrow values in working within the political process, and I don't mean that you should go and vote religiously or feel that you have any obligation to vote or be a part of the system that way. And I do believe that politics is secondary to the paradigm shift that we're experiencing and to how we live our lives differently. Our daily lives and opting out of this system. So I see that still as far more important than the political process, but the political process serves two important functions specifically for the cause of liberty. And the first one is as a mechanism of outreach, as a foil, as the straight man, that we can go up against the politicians and be like, hey, guess what? There's an alternative to electing some douchebag to be in charge of you. And I think that it's a great way for outreach. But then also as a way of using the political process to make the political reality or the governmental policy reality reflect the paradigm shift. So when they're sort of after the paradigm shift, we can drag government along with us through the political process. And I hope that ends in maybe 5 or 6 presidential election cycles when everybody running for president is going, you should elect me because I'm the best man for the job. And we all agree that the job is how do we dismantle this thing as quickly as possible. And even short of that, I think that there is some value to participating in the political process to, limit what people can get away with. But I don't think that should be the primary motivator or mechanism of bringing about a free society.
Mm-hmm. So, is this correct that if Gary Johnson gets 5% in the upcoming elections, that that will get the status of the third party up, or is that a misinterpretation from a Brit who has no idea about the actual process? That they would get 90 million or something towards the party?
I am very proud to say I have no idea.
Right. Oh, fair enough.
Part of, I guess, honestly, relatively recent development. Like I said when we started this conversation, that I'm kind of embarrassed about how long it took me and how slow it's been for me to get to where I am. Because, just a year ago, I probably could have told you everything about the inner workings of the Libertarian Party and, all of these ballot access issues that they're facing and everything else. And now, frankly, I realize that it's not that important. It's not as important as developing a proper understanding of the world and striving to live your life more effectively. I could spend my time studying that, or I could spend my time, learning how to better trade in Bitcoin, or how to pay less taxes, or how to wake up my neighbors, or how to develop an agorist business. And I think things like that are just a more effective use of time. Not that I have anything against him. Mm-hmm. I totally see Gary Johnson doing what he's doing. I think he's having a greater impact in a sense than I am right now, at least in the immediate short term, in waking people up and spreading the message. But if it wasn't him, it might be someone else jumping up who'd be I actually supporting in the primary in the Libertarian Party, R.J. Harris from Oklahoma, because
right.
he's a combat veteran and an attorney who is a true voluntarist, and Gary Johnson is not, and that's I think Gary Johnson's message, as great as it is in terms of practical policy initiatives and changing government, and that's why I can wholeheartedly say I would absolutely love Gary Johnson as president next to the relative evils of Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. But if it wasn't Gary Johnson, it would be R.J. Harris, and I think he'd be doing an even better job in spreading the message than Gary Johnson is. So, I support him. I think it's important to take advantage of the venue provided there that exists within the Libertarian Party to help build it so that the Libertarian movement can have that outlet and that mechanism. And so when we do get to critical mass, who knows, maybe the Libertarian Party will be the way that it's manifest in the political process. But I'm not really that worried about it. I know that when the paradigm shifts, it'll be manifest one way or another.
Yeah, I guess the question is, how long does that paradigm shift, or how long is it likely to take? How much compromise is going to be necessary on the journey? And in terms of those sort of moving towards more agorist means of counter-economics, you talk about black or grey markets. What potential is there for the state to sort of co-opt them or subsume them once they become popular and threaten the structure of the state?
Well, this is my long view of human history comes in very handy and is very reassuring when you're faced with questions like, and look at the short term, you look at where government is going, you see things getting worse, and you wonder how much longer is this going to go on? How much longer is this fiat system even sustainable? And when I take the long view of human history, I see that we are evolving towards a state of liberty because cooperation is always superior to coercion. Mm-hmm. And it's the fact of biology that cooperation is favored by nature, that those societies that are better able to cooperate without coercion will flourish, and those individuals who are better able to relate to each other without coercion will be more prosperous. So taking the long view of human history in that sense is very reassuring, because what I see happening right now is that we are evolving past statism, is that it is a phase of human evolution, and it is just one part of this experience and this journey that life on Earth is on. And we are coming to the end of this particularly destructive phase, and it's a process, 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, that happens on many levels simultaneously. And you could say that the founding of the Federal Reserve in 1913 was the start of a major step backwards. But in that time period, we've also had major steps forward in the civil rights movement and the women's rights movement and the gay rights movement. And, that's just in America, which is also a very myopic view of the world that we have here in the United States. But I really see that globally, we are evolving past statism. And I think it's going to happen more as I don't think as it happens, we're going to be able, or at least the majority of the people are going to see it as that, because what's happening is that there is an evolution of how people relate to each other. And with technology, thoughts, cooperation, coercion is being driven out of the market, being driven out of society, slowly but surely, one interaction at a time. And what's happening is that government at the highest levels is becoming less and less sustainable because of those challenges to its power. And for example, in the United States, what I'd like to see is a localism happen and that the move to a voluntary society happen by an atomization of government, that we first dissolve the federal government and we get down just to the states, and then down counties and cities, and then down to where it's eventually small enough that it can be fully replaced by voluntary relationships. And in that sense, I don't think people are ever going to see it as that until after it's happened. But we're very fortunate to be living in these times in particular. I mean, this is a very, very exciting time to be alive, because all of the various ranges that I've heard, of people talking about how long is the dollar system sustainable, or the euro, or as I see it, these are being the underpinnings of the statist system as a whole. How long is statism sustainable for? And it's going to come, at least you are going to see it, that you're going to see the beginning of the end within your lifetime. Mm-hmm. I'd like to say I'm pessimistic for the midterm and the short term, but optimistic for the long term. So how is the long term? Could it be with the technological curves that are all on exponential growth rate curves? How long is this going to take? I don't know. It could be as little as 10 years that we're really able to do this, because the technology is there. And maybe the next viral video like Coney 2012 that literally goes all over the world overnight is the one that declares governments to be invalid. And people are ready to hear that message at some point. And that's it. And that's what does. The paradigm really starts to shift, and the attitude towards government changes, and it just comes crumbling down. But who knows? It could drag on. It could be that the people who depend on these systems, who are psychologically invested in coercion, only are able to slowly lower the guns of government as they are actually forced to.
And of course, the state is already planning. I mean, we have Agenda 21 in England. We have what Cameron calls the big society, which is basically, on the face of it, it's localism. But when you actually get into the nitty gritty, the state is still omnipresent. But they basically give local towns like their own commissioners to dictate the orders from the state. It's presented as if it's the local towns and municipalities having control over their local government. There's going to be this constant fight where we're going to have to educate people into the that a lot of the things that are presented to us from the state, like this big society and all this, which seems like a good idea because it's local level, grassroots. A lot of that is intent. It's just repackaging the state, and I guess that's. They're having to do that because these ideas are so powerful, and the logic of having small accountable government is so watertight that they're having to package it in a way that they can continue with their sort of ideas. But yeah,
you have to be able to see the positive in something like government is pretending that you are free. It's because people are demanding it.
Exactly.
Government is making that posture. It's because the paradigm has shifted a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, it's positive. It's just I guess it's one of those things that it requires continual vigilance, which I guess is like that with everything in life. That's part of the joys of living.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess my concern is what you described there, and rather optimistically, and that's great, and I think it's something we all hope for. It seems like there's a bit of a race on between the type of mass awakening and critical mass awakening that you're talking about, and the sort of the development of technologies to help us, versus the time it's going to take for world government to truly come to fruition, and the creation of a world military and a world currency, and I guess it's which comes first, really.
Yes, well, I would say that the government is a product of the paradigm, and and seeing this from an evolutionary perspective, it comes from the fact that in our primitive past, coercion and violence was, I don't want to say the best, but before the written language, before we had spoken language as we do today, it was a way of communicating. It was a way of cooperating. It was a way of bringing society together. But now we've got something better. It's called using your words, like your mom taught you.
Yeah, absolutely. So just sort of changing gears slightly. You're perhaps most famous, obviously, Adam, for the sort of direct action and guerrilla journalism, and that we see on your YouTube channel. Perhaps your most famous video, of course, is you being so nicely body slammed and choked at the Jefferson Memorial. And this definitely provides a powerful example of the value of being indignant to the arbitrary authority that is the state. Can you tell us why you feel this is important, and do you envisage more people taking part in this in the future?
Well, if you're referring to the dance party in particular as an act of civil disobedience, it was more than an act of civil disobedience, in a way less than an act of civil disobedience, because the law that we were protesting wasn't that important. We did a free fucking speech demonstration in Middleborough, Massachusetts, to protest their public censorship laws, and it wasn't about those laws. And if we could get people to stand up to the significant ones, we'd be holding mass tax revolts instead of, these petty demonstrations against silly little regulations. But there's an immense power in it. And I think what we're doing at this phase of the movement, when we do activism like that, especially something like the Jefferson Dance Party, it's really more like performance art. And it's performance art with a point. And the point is to show the nature of government. And the government was very helpful in that regard when it came for when it came to the Jefferson Dance Party and exposing themselves as the violent thugs that they are. So I think it's very important as a means of communication for people right now. I feel like people like me, people who are stepping out, engaging in civil disobedience, doing that kind of public activism, hosting public protests, are kind of showing the way, but it's not quite the way yet, because when we have a critical mass of people who are willing to engage in civil disobedience, the way is going to be the things that disempower government itself, and it's in a way it's already happening on a much more subtle scale, like I mentioned earlier, as you said, in agorism, in withdrawing the consent in terms of the way you conduct your daily life, when you have the option of conducting a transaction in a way that the government knows about it and is going to tax you for it, versus doing it under the table. And I think that's at least as significant. But you're going to see, when that gets to a critical mass, the kinds of open revolts of saying, no, this law is not going to fly here. We're just not going to follow it. That stuff's going to get a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. I think it also crosses party lines when you have something so simple as that. It wakes a lot of people up to the fact that, how much control and how ludicrous the control is. And I think that it does amazing work, especially when the state then comes in and bullies to enforce such a ridiculous law in the first place. You would think that the government enforcers would sit back and say, well, we're not going to be heavy-handed because it's such a silly law in the first place, but they do, and it's a striking example of just how far we've gone, and that we have to turn it around.
It's the arbitrary nature of it really that stands out, isn't it? Just finally, we don't want to take too much more of your time, Adam. Really appreciate it. But just one thing that really stood out for me with the videos that you did at the Occupy movement, it must be over a year ago now. And I really like the fact that you explicitly demonstrated that really they didn't represent the 99%, and in particular, some of the debates you had with people espousing Keynesian economics and things, you really sort of shot down their arguments and explained how anarcho-capitalism really can be a solution. Could you just speak to that for us, please?
Sure. Well, I think it's a great tactic of journalism that anybody can pick up to go to these events, with a libertarian perspective. And I think that's what makes us unique. And I think one of the ways a lot of people come to libertarianism is simply by asking why. And, when you ask why about the government, eventually you find there are no good answers. And so what I was doing at the Occupy movement was just simply going out and starting Socratic dialogues with people. And, hey, how's it going? Why are you here? Yeah. Tell me here. Oh, really? Well, you don't see a problem with that? And it just sort of leading down a line of questioning that exposes the logical fallacies behind the positions that they're taking. And, you can do this with anybody. It's just the Occupy movement was a really, really juicy target full of politically enthusiastic people with very, very bad ideas. And, you can go to a Romney event and they'll say, well, we don't, I understand your point and we don't really like Romney, but okay, we're going, and you have to be like, okay, fine. But with people in the Occupy movement, actually, I have a lot more respect for occupiers than most other political groups in this country, because they came out based on an honest sense of outrage, and they were well mentioned, and they wanted to do well, and they meant well, and they really were simply misguided, I think, by their rage, and they were turning to government and obviously turning to the people that caused the very problems they were railing against. So that in particular, as a libertarian, made a very, very juicy target for me. Yeah. Like I was saying, this is something as a tactic that I think everybody with a camcorder should be able to do, is get out and have those conversations and record them and expose bad ideas when they come to life in the world. But I covered the Occupy movement very extensively because I respected it. As much as I loved making fun of it, as much as I was poking fun at them and making them look like idiots when I could, compared to the people who are asleep, what was I going to cover instead? The politicians are saying? No. I have way more respect for those that represent at least, a much broader part of the public sentiment, as the Occupy movement did. And so I as rude as I may have been at times in making fun of them,
I don't think you were rude. I think you were to the point.
I don't mean rude in my mannerism, in the way that some people would criticize my coverage, because I wasn't there to cover it objectively at all. I was there to make a point. Mm-hmm. But I think what I did was far, far, far more respectful of the Occupy movement than what the mainstream media did, which was treat them, as a phenomenon to make news and to disregard and to be like, oh, they're for this. Well, look at them get arrested. And I didn't cover stuff like that. I got into why they were there, and I talked to them. And I think what I did was welcome them to the national conversation and respect them as legitimate voices in the national conversation and engage them in a way that the mainstream media didn't.
And I mean, hats off to them as well. No matter, there was obviously a lot of clout and money put behind trying to co-opt the movement, and they were fragmented enough that it didn't really happen. And then that sort of culminated in the way that they were sort of unceremoniously, when they couldn't co-opt them totally, they started just arresting them and moving them on. So it was obviously in the right direction of where we want to go, in that there this two-party system where it was, you know, so polarized into my party or your party, and people were actually starting to demand some sort of direct action outside of the party system, which, you know, is only a good thing. It's obviously more in the right direction than just picking a football side. You know?
As you say, anything that gets the conversation going and starts, you know, having the debate from a logical and rational perspective and breaking it down to the nuts and bolts of the philosophy behind it. I applaud anything and anyone who's doing that, really. So, I doff my hat to you there.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate it. And right now, we're, it's funny that I couldn't even get through this interview with you without a technical difficulty because we just into the new studios. And I think if CIA was sabotaging my operation, it couldn't have been any more challenging. We have not been able to plug in a single device without having some technical difficulty associated with it. But we started just this week doing the podcast, the Adam versus the Man podcast live. Mm-hmm. Days a week, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern time. We're right before I came to sit down with you, we were setting up the shots in our studio downstairs when our power went out, and our internet then separately went out right afterwards. We were setting up the shots for the new Adam versus the Man nightly newscast. So very exciting to be developing these two new outlets for our media operation here. And if people want to check that out and support it, adamversustheman.com. And as you mentioned, I have a lot of great videos on my channel from when I was in Occupy, most of them from a year ago. If you go to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Adam Kokesh, Kokesh, and sort by most popular, you'll see some of them pop up there. So please check them out. And if you want to share them, support what I'm doing, you know, when you've got a monetized YouTube channel, all you have to do to support me is share my videos. And we really, really appreciate everybody who does that and who takes it as an opportunity to spread the message.
Awesome, Adam. We spread the word over on Liberty Tactics and No Fit State about your work because I think you're one of the most vocal, outspoken proponents for this new age of libertarianism and great work. So people head over to that. I think that's cool.
Yeah.
And hopefully you get rid of your status gremlins and get your technical difficulties sorted
Just remember, that which does not kill you only makes you stronger, Adam.
Yeah, and every technical difficulty is just another opportunity to learn your equipment better, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Oh, okay, Adam. Well, thanks for taking time out to talk with us, and hopefully we'll be able to speak to you again some point in the future. And awesome.
Yeah, big thanks, Adam.
Cheers, gents.
Is there somebody that's leading y'all here, or y'all just... I understand. Is this the group of you? There's no group. All right. Give you your warnings. If you come out here and you demonstrate by dancing, you will be placed on arrest. Does everybody understand? Does everybody understand that? If you live more than 50 miles away from the District of Columbia, you will spend the night, the weekend in jail. The whole weekend? Yes. Does everybody understand that?
Sir, that's illegal. What would we be charged with?
You are too far away from the city to allow citation to reappear. Therefore, they lock you up and hold you for court.
What he's asking is a violation of what
You'll find out.
What law is that?
Sir, I'm just giving you your warnings right now.
You're telling us you'll arrest us, but you're not telling us
We're not demonstrating. If you're dancing in here, we're demonstrating this form.
What is dancing? What is dancing? What if you're out of time and you're making movements with your body?
Whoa,
That's still dancing.
hey.
Oh, wait a second.
You can go to jail for doing that.
You're not allowed to have free expression or free speech in the memorial to Thomas Jefferson, the champion of free speech.
We're moving, man. We're in love. We're touching each other. So we're stopping. We're stopping. What are you doing? We're stopping. You are not arresting us for standing
For
here.
what? You didn't even give me a warning.
I didn't give you a warning.
Dancing in a public area is now.
You didn't give me a warning. You didn't even give me a warning. What is your problem?
Dancing is a crime.
You didn't even give me a warning. If you would have said something, I would have stopped. You didn't say anything.
I don't understand. I came over. I didn't even hear. I didn't even hear. Sir, I didn't even hear. Sir.
I didn't hear. I never talked to that guy. What are you talking about? America, sir.
You hate the Constitution, don't you?
Excuse me, sir. Did you ever talk to me?
You hate America, don't you? You hate freedom. All those men that are missing, all those MIAs.
Sir, turn around, put your hands behind your back.
Hey, watch my arm, watch my arm! Watch my arm, watch my arm! Watch my arm! Don't, I got a broken shoulder. I've got a bad shoulder.
Put your hands behind your back. Put your hands behind your back. Stop resisting. I'm not resisting. Stop resisting.
This is America. This is America when you dance in the public place. When you dance.
Sir, this is your last warning. Get on your knees right now. Sir, this is your last warning. Sir, this is your last warning.
What is going on?
Turn him over.
What is going on here?
Those are mine. Those are yours. I didn't want you to step down. 103 Stardust units. Keep station 10-6.
Why are we doing this? This is ridiculous.
I didn't get an order. Hey, Sergeant, I did not get an order from you. I never heard from you one thing. It was there, Sergeant.
Jim,
I never got an order from you. No, I'm not shutting up. You cannot shut me up. That's not the way this works. You cannot shut anyone up. You cannot stop them from dancing. You cannot stop them from kissing. You cannot stop them from doing things that come natural to people. We did absolutely nothing wrong. That sergeant told me nothing. He said nothing to me. That's wrong. You are being violently wrong. Telling me to shut up and I can't kiss my girlfriend inside this building. No, I'm not keeping my voice down. You're arresting me anyway for nothing. You told me I couldn't even kiss my girlfriend.
yourself back.
I don't believe that you're pushing me back.
Get out of here.
This is mine. Can I grab it? Hey, Sergeant! 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 Sergeant!
Damn, it's closed. Forward, you'll be arrested. Clear them out.
sorry, the memorial is temporarily closed. There's an elevator.
I understand, yes, but we wanted to, back up, folks.
I'm sorry. Does everybody have a permit for the videos?
Police state! This is our police state! This is our police state! This is our police state!
I understand. I understand that. Is this the group of you? All right. Give you your warnings. If you come out here and you demonstrate by dancing, you will be placed under arrest. Does everybody understand that? Does everybody understand that? If you live more than 50 miles away from the District of Columbia, you will spend the weekend in jail.
Whole weekend?
Yes. Does everybody understand that?
Sir, that's illegal. What would we be charged with?
You are too far away from the city to allow citation to reappear. Therefore, they lock you up and hold you for court.
What he's asking is in violation of what
You'll
law?
find out.
What law is that?
Sir, I'm just giving you your warnings right now. If you dance and demonstrate,
But we're not demonstrating.
if you're dancing in here, you were demonstrating as a form of
What is
demonstration.
dancing?
I'm done.
What is dancing? What if you're out of time when you're making movements with your body? Is that still dancing?
Guys, stop.
You can go to jail for doing that.
You're not allowed to have free expression or free speech in the memorial to Thomas Jefferson, the champion of free speech.
We're moving, man.
We're just touching each other. So we're stopping. We're stopping. We're stopping. You are not arresting us for standing
For
here.
what?
Here it is.
You didn't even give me a warning.
Dancing in a public area.
Give me a warning.
Dancing in a public area.
You didn't even give me a warning.
We can dance if we want to. We can leave our friends behind. Because if cops don't dance and if they don't dance with us, no friends of mine. Unbelievable.
Said something, I would have stopped. Say it. You did not say Who did? Quick, where's the sergeant? I don't even know who the sergeant is. I didn't
You're allowed to dance in America, sir.
You hate the Constitution, don't you?
Excuse me, sir. Did you ever talk to me?
You hate America. You hate freedom.
Hey, Sergeant. First up, Sergeant, could you talk to me? Sergeant.
When you can stop.
Did you talk to me? Sergeant. Did you talk to me?
Watch my arm! Watch my arm! Don't, I got a broken shoulder. I've got a bad shoulder.
Put your hands behind your back. Put your hands behind your back, sir. Stop resisting. Stop resisting.
This is America. This is America when you dance in a public place. When you dance, this is illegal to dance. Sir, this is your last warning. Sir, this is your last warning.
What is going on here?
Turn it over.
What would you think of this?
What is going on here?
You cannot dance. 103 Stardust units, keep station 10 6.
And I was going like this, sir. Why are we doing this? This is ridiculous.
Catherine, come here.
Arrested for dancing.
Let me give you my phone.
I never heard from you one thing. Sergeant.
Jeremiah, I need to give you my money. My money.
You cannot shut me up. That's not the way this works. You cannot shut anyone up. You cannot stop them from dancing. You cannot stop them from kissing. You cannot stop them from doing things that come natural to people. We did absolutely nothing wrong. That's Sergeant.
You must leave.
He said,
Is press not allowed here either?
You're not allowed to video record in here. Go.
I'm pressed.
Doesn't matter.
Unbelievable.
You're allowed to dance in America, sir.
You hate the Constitution, don't you?
excuse me, sir. Did you ever talk to me?
You hate America. You hate freedom.
Hey, Sergeant. First up, Sergeant. Did you talk to me? Sergeant.
When you can stop.
Did you talk to me? Sergeant. Did you talk to me?
Watch my arm! Watch my arm! Don't, I got a broken shoulder. I've got a bad shoulder.
Put your hands behind your back. Put your hands behind your back, sir. Stop resisting. Stop resisting.
This is America. This is America when you dance in a public place. When you dance, this is illegal to dance. Sir, this is your last.
That we do kind of pride ourselves in a bit of a rebellious nature and being hardcore like that. But for me, joining the Marines was wanting to serve my country, wanting to defend this country. But I should also point out that in a really sick kind of way, I actually used to say more or less these exact words, that if the government decides that someone deserves to die, I want to be the person behind the trigger. And when you understand what government is, you understand what a sick beta male lackey kind of, statement that is. And it really is disturbing in hindsight. I think that was my mentality, and that's the mentality of a lot of people in the military today. But I joined the reserves because my parents expected me to go to college, and I was in the reserves when I volunteered to go to Fallujah in 2004. before. I served with the civil affairs team. I'm still stuck in that statist language. Did I just say served? Did I just get in the Marines as serving? Because I'm going to use that word, like as you do, who's the government working for? Well, it's certainly not the American people. So if I was serving in the military, it was serving the whims of politicians at the behest of the military-industrial complex. But I have to say, and this is what I mean by having to start the story earlier, is that it really is kind of a slow story and kind of an embarrassingly slow one when you see how fast people are coming out of the matrix these days thanks to the internet. We used to say, what's the difference between a minarchist and an anarchist, and joke that it was about 6 months. Well, now we have to say, well, maybe more like 2 weeks of watching the right YouTube videos and reading Wikipedia articles. And even what I realized about the first battle of Fallujah that I was a part of, watching the second battle play on the front page of the New York Times when I was in college, and realizing that men were dying. Hey, I'm really sorry about that. Our regular internet here is on the fritz thanks to Verizon, so I'm on and off a hotspot.
Oh, no problem, mate.
Yeah, so what I was talking about was the video in question was your Ground Zero military outreach, which was conveniently interrupted by the NYPD. And really what I was getting at was to what extent the officers in question are consumed with military objectives and the camaraderie of it all, and really, how politically aware you can be as a soldier.
Well, it's tough. We have a lot of members of the Adam versus the Man audience who are active duty military, and it's really encouraging to know that. And we have even one who's an instructor at an MOS school at Cherry Point in North Carolina, the Marine Corps base. And he actually uses our videos as part of his discussion time with his troops, and that's really exciting. But
that's awesome.
It's difficult. It's like when you're in the middle of committing a crime and you realize that it's a crime, and what do you do in that situation, especially when there are dire consequences to, immediate withdrawal of your actions and your contribution to the military. But you were asking about that video of our outreach at Ground Zero on 9/11. And I was talking to some of the troops that were guarding one of the metro stations there. At least a lot of people are. And for me, it was a process that really took more like a dozen years. So when I got back from Iraq, I was still in the bubble. I was still isolated from the true nature of the world and of government. And I volunteered to go back to Iraq because I didn't get a Purple Heart the first time. So trying to go back to Iraq, having gotten in trouble for bringing a pistol back the first time, being a case of government waste myself as a sergeant who spoke Arabic with civil affairs experience, really motivated me because I got busted down the day after they gave me a medal, like right before getting out of the military. And I think I'm very grateful for that experience because I was just disgruntled enough to really start questioning things. And I think it's important to point out that a lot of people who come to this message, the early adopters, if you will, aren't the captains of the football team or the cheerleading squad or the student body presidents. They're the outcasts, the misfits, the victims of the system rather than the ones that are protected by it. And in that sense, I think those of us who have had such experiences are much more inclined to start questioning the nature of government. And that was a very, very pivotal experience for me, getting busted down and then being given a medal one day and literally busted down the next day, and then soon after that getting out of the Marines, really prepared me to have my mind open in challenging the status quo. And for me, it was even that wasn't enough for me to say that was the transformation.
and welcome to No Fit State, a program that asks the question, if the government are clearly not working in our best interest, who are they working for? As always, leading you down this slippery precipice is James, that's me, and Mike, who I'll pass you over to now.
On today's show, we're pleased to welcome American activist and talk radio host Adam Kokesh from AdamVersusTheMan.com. Adam was a corporal in the United States Marine Corps Reserve, and he is a veteran of the Iraq War. By challenging authority, Adam argues that the reality of government is not based on protecting the freedoms of the people, but exploiting them to perpetuate its own power and serve its sponsors. The message of freedom that Adam's show is based on is about conquering that desire to rule over others and that willingness to accept rule by force. Hi Adam, I'm Mike. Just to kick us off, Adam, I wonder if you can tell us about your experience as a member of the US military, serving in Iraq in 2004, and perhaps speak to how this led to you pursuing the path that you've taken, really.
Sure. Well, my experience in the military is probably the largest motivator of my conversion, my awakening, if you will. But it really is a bit of a longer process than that. And the story has to start before I enlisted in the Marines, because when I was in high school, even I think middle school, as a kid, I was a libertarian, although I didn't even know what it meant. It was more like, well, I'm going to be a libertarian because I'm not going to be a Republican or a Democrat. Hell no. So it was that I had to be a libertarian to not be, part of the status quo. For me, kind of being a rebellious punk kid led me to want to be a libertarian, which is what led me to join the Marines as opposed to one of the other branches. Is